Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the player review series rolls on. Will Josh Minott get another chance to crack the rotation next year? And how about that surprising rookie season from Jaylen Clark? It's all upcoming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I am the host of Locked On Wolves. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Happy hump day. And today on the show, we're going to continue the player review series. We actually just started it yesterday. So rolling through the end of the roster, I'm going to fudge it a little bit. So typically I just go in reverse order of minutes played, but toward the end of the Wolves roster, there's a couple of pretty clear buckets that guys fit into. So we're going to talk about, I'll explain in a minute. We'll talk about Josh Minott, but I want to start with Jaylen Clark today. We're going to basically do a half show on each of those guys because I think there's a lot to be said. The Wolves have some pretty intriguing guys from basically number 9 through 12 on the roster. Like the next four guys we're going to talk about are really in limbo in terms of who has a chance at cracking this potentially expanded rotation that Chris Finch teased after the season ended. Who has a shot to really be in the rotation next year, who could be on the outside looking in, and who may not even be back. So we'll do that today on the show as we talk about Clark and Minott. First, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves, and you can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Okay. So as I mentioned, I think there's a pretty clean way to break this down, right? The Wolves had 8 rotation guys, essentially. They had 3 two-way guys who we talked about in yesterday's show. And then they had 3 guys who were pretty end of the roster type guys we talked about yesterday as well. Leonard Miller, Luka Garza, and Joe Ingles. Okay. And that leaves 4 guys kind of in the middle between, that have a shot at cracking the rotation and we're kind of on the fringes of it throughout the season. So in no particular order, well, actually, I will give them to you in a particular order. I'll give them to you in order of minutes played. So of those 4 guys, Jaylen Clark, Rob Dillingham, TJ Shannon, and Josh Minott. Those are the 4 guys I want to spend talking today and tomorrow talking about. So I'm going to do 2 each day. And Jaylen Clark and Rob Dillingham played the most minutes. So typically the way I would do this, I would do Minott and TJ Shannon. But I think the 2 guys that fit in a similar category are Josh Minott and Jaylen Clark. In part because, Dillingham and TJ Shannon were both first-round picks last year. Clark and Minott were both second-round picks. They've both been on the roster for an extra year. But I also see their roles, even though like TJ Shannon and Josh Minott are more similar in terms of the position they play, the type of player that Clark and Minott are is a bit similar. And I feel like they're in a similar place in terms of their effort to crack the rotation. So let's start with Jaylen Clark. I think he's pretty intriguing, at least in terms of what he provided this season. The fact that he almost he briefly saw some rotation minutes in the playoffs. If you include like a couple of 2-minute stints, their rotation minutes and that they were non-garbage time minutes, right? So setting up who Jaylen Clark is, if you're not familiar, if you don't know how he ended up on the team or any of that stuff, very quickly, he was a second-round pick 2 years ago. In 2023, so the 22-23 college, I guess it was 23-24 college season, Jaylen Clark was the best. He won the award for the best perimeter defense or the best defensive player in all of college basketball. He tore his Achilles in March with UCLA and then fell to the second round. And there were still some analysts who said that they would have drafted him in the first round despite the Achilles injury. He was that good defensively in college. And my notes from when they drafted him were, he reminded me, and actually here's, I guess I didn't even actually remember that I'd said this. I'm talking about him and Minott today. I actually put in my notes after they drafted Jaylen Clark. He's a smaller, less athletic, but overall more polished version of Josh Minott. They're obviously very, like Josh Minott's like 3 inches taller, much bigger wingspan, but the way that they play is pretty similar. Jaylen Clark has a nose for the ball. He's outstanding defensively, both off and on the ball. Again, this is my scouting report before we saw him play in a Timberwolves uniform. good, he's not huge, but he's got good enough size for guarding point of attack, especially to guard, point guards. He's 6'5", 6'9" wingspan. But the defensive IQ is just fantastic. And he's a really good rebounder, which he hasn't really showed yet at the NBA level, but I anticipate that to be something he shows on both ends of the floor for a guard, right? Like he's not going to get 10 boards a game. He's a guard. But for a guard, he's a really good rebounder. And again, I go back to the nose for the ball. I had concerns on the offensive end. In fact, I actually have in my notes, and now it actually feels silly, but I'm just going to read it. I was worried that he may have less offensive upside than, trying to use a former Wolves comp, a defense first player like a Josh Okogie, right? But my butt in my notes here was, even though that like he was that stiff and robotic in terms of his jump shot in college, I thought the fact that he had touch on his floater and he was so young, like combined, and really the touch on the floater, something that Josh Okogie never really had. Like, has never developed, never felt like he would. But there's some stuff in there. And again, the defensive IQ plays into it. Like, it feels like there's some of those things that he could develop. The free throw percentage was bad, which is concerning. And again, the mechanics are stiff on the shot. The word I used was robotic. But I thought he was so good defensively that it outweighed all of that. And obviously the Timberwolves did too. And I thought he had a real shot. And the Wolves, as an example, to show how much they thought of him, they picked him in the second round, but they also gave him a 2-year, 2-way contract. And by the way, it was late second round too. They got him 53rd overall. So like the 8th to last pick of the entire draft in the 23 draft. I misspoke earlier. I said 24, the 23 draft, but they gave him a 2-year, 2-way deal immediately. And so of course, all of year one, they knew he'd be rehabbing. They knew he wouldn't see the floor. He practiced a little bit toward the end of last season with Minnesota and then played in Summer League. And we saw this in Summer League too. He had a couple of multi-steal games and the offense looked pretty tentative. And then he finally saw the floor, was cleared to play in the regular season this year for the Wolves, and was really good. And we saw really the scouting report. I think the only thing I would change based on what I've seen at the NBA level is I think the offensive upside is greater than certainly what I anticipated, greater than what I had in my scouting report for him. He shot 43%, albeit on limited attempts from outside the arc. I mean, he played in 40 regular season games, still only 51 3-point attempts, but he was 43.1% from deep. I mean, this is a guy who in college, that number at UCLA was 30%. His last year at UCLA, 32.9% before he got hurt. And for his career over 3 seasons, 90 games in college, he was only 30.2% on threes. And then he shows up in the NBA and shoots 43% again on 51 attempts. But still extremely impressive. He played kind of sparingly the first few games he saw the floor. And then right at the end of January, post Dante DiVincenzo's injury, remember he got hurt in that game against the Warriors, and it still took a few games after that where Jaylen Clark cracked the rotation. But he played some key minutes in an 8-point win at Phoenix. Then the next night, on the second night of a back-to-back, he scored 6 points, knocked down a 3 in 17 minutes against Utah. And then he was part of the rotation. And this was a round when, of course, there were a lot of injuries. I talked the other night about, or on a Tuesday show, about Anthony Edwards missed the Wizards game. Julius Randle was out, etc. Like Joe Ingles played a ton of minutes. He had 9 points in that game. And then he had a stretch where he knocked down at least 1 3 in 6 consecutive games. And he played in, how many straight games did he play? I mean, he basically played in every game than the rest of the regular season. From like January 29th on, he was he was in every single game the rest of the season. And some games it was 3 minutes and some games it was 18 minutes. And it really kind of fluctuated. A lot of it, of course, was bit rotation minutes based on who is available. He also had a couple of games where he looked really comfortable offensively. He had a 3-3-point three-pointer made game in a blowout win against the Pelicans. He also had a game where he played 20 minutes and didn't even attempt a shot, but he had 3 steals. So we saw a lot. It was all over the map from Jaylen Clark. And I do think there's some offensive, certainly upside. I mean, we're still talking about a guy who's he's 23, I think, right now. 23. He turns 24 in mid-October. So still relatively young. It'll be his 3rd year as a pro, but it's only his 2nd year playing as a pro because he missed that whole season due to the Achilles injury. I want to talk about what a potential role for him could be on next year's team. And then we'll transition into talking about Josh Minott. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Betterhelp. The show is sponsored by Betterhelp. Let's talk about something that doesn't get talked about enough: men's mental health. There's a pressure to always keep it together, to perform, provide, and never show weakness. But the truth is, real strength comes from opening up and taking care of your mental well-being. Every year, 6 billion men in the U.S. experience depression, and many go undiagnosed. But talking to someone, a friend, a loved one, or a therapist can make a huge difference. Therapy isn't just for crisis moments either. It's great for learning how to set boundaries, build healthy coping tools, and really just to be the best version of yourself. It's not only for the downtimes, it's for all the time, to make sure you're always in the best possible place when it comes to your mental health. BetterHelp has over 35,000 licensed professionals, and they make it easy to find a therapist who understands you. You can connect from anywhere, switch therapists at any time, and fit sessions into your schedule with just a click. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. Okay, so finishing up the conversation on Jaylen Clark, I was concerned that the offense would hold him back from a rotation role. That obviously wasn't the case. Minnesota felt comfortable with his ability to knock down threes at, again, a 43% clip. He saw himself with a lot of corner three-point opportunities. He was right in line with that, 42.9% from the corners, and more than half his shots, actually 55% of his three-point attempts did come from the corners. He was very comfortable there. He could guard multiple positions. Like, this is a rotation player, and as soon as the Wolves got to the playoffs, the rotation really shrunk to 8, and Jaylen Clark got a brief opportunity to play against OKC, and the shoot was pulled when it came to Clark in playoff minutes. And I get it to an extent. Minnesota needed offense in that series against OKC. They needed ball handlers. Jaylen Clark can handle the ball. He's not a point guard. He can shoot threes. He's not creating his own shot or really creating for others. So I get it in its most basic level, but there's also the argument that could you have beaten the Thunder with more of what the Thunder do? Probably not. The Thunder are incredible. You're probably not going to beat them at their own game. But Jaylen Clark, TJ Shannon, guys that play fast, wreak havoc, and can score in transition, can generate turnovers from the opponent, force those turnovers themselves. I mean, that's something Jaylen Clark can do. I do think there's a rotation role for him next year, and we're going to talk about Minott in a second. I think in some ways he's competing with Minott for that role. The obvious answer is TJ Shannon, or maybe it's the other guard, which is Rob Dillingham. So it might be a little funny that you may be thinking I'm crazy for thinking he's battling with Minott, but I think because they're defense first guys that rely on transition for their scoring. Yes, TJ Shannon's great in transition. Dillingham's good in transition too. But those guys, at least in theory, can do a little bit more for you in the half court. They're going to be more consistent catch and shoot guys. They are going to do more than simply score in transition, whereas Minott and Clark are defense first. And the Clark role, I think, depends a little bit on, like, is Nickeil Alexander-Walker coming back? Not a little bit, a lot bit, on if Na is back or not. And then also Dante DiVincenzo. I'd be absolutely shocked if he's not on the team next year. He's got an extremely valuable contract and 2 more years on it. But there's always the possibility he's moved in a trade. And depending on the Wolves' feelings on Jaylen Clark, I think his role next year is going to be a lot like what it was this year. However, he's earned more leash. In 40 regular season games, playing in, 30 plus consecutive games to close the regular season, earning some very minimal playoff minutes. There's some more leash for Jaylen Clark, certainly than there is for Josh Minott. And probably at this point more than certainly more than Dillingham, but also more than Shannon. He has more trust from the coaching staff because of the way in which he defends and what he was able to do offensively. He didn't get out over his skis on offense, which is something we've seen happen to Minott. I truly think that Clark is the 9th man going into the year next year, the regular season. And I think he's in the 10 minutes a game plus or minus range. And this is assuming, obviously, we don't know how this offseason plays out. But if this same roster was copied and pasted to the fall, and very likely, the majority of it will be, if Nickeil and Nas are back and Dante, I think Jaylen Clark is the ninth guy, and I think he's plus or minus 10 minutes a game. And I think there's more leash depending on the opponent, depending on how Nikhil's playing, depending on how Mike Conley's playing. That's another thing we have to factor in is how many minutes is Conley going to play. Not that Jaylen Clark, he's not directly filling the Conley minutes, but overall in this pie of minutes, if Conley plays less, somebody else has to play more. And ultimately, could that be Jaylen Clark? I think, again, more leash and more opportunity for Jaylen Clark next year. And I think we're sitting here, next June, hopefully still playing basketball in the finals. But Jaylen Clark played 40 games in a little over 500 minutes this year. I think certainly a year from now, we could be looking at his minutes total doubling. I think we're talking over 1,000 minutes and, playing in the vast majority of games next year for Minnesota. I think that's which, if he played 1,000 minutes, that would still be ninth on the team in this season, which is what he was actually at 522. But I think ultimately the volume of minutes he plays will be more. I don't think he shoots 43% from three again with it given more volume, but it's super encouraging that he did do that. And he only attempted 37 free throws, but he was 78%. And this is a guy who that was a concern. I mean, coming out of college, he was, what was the free throw percentage? It was not good in college. It was 66% and just under 70%. So 69.8% in his final year of college. So the free throw percentage, the 3-point percentage being what they are is very encouraging for Jaylen Clark. And I do think there's certainly some offensive upside there for him as well. All right, let's transition to talking about Josh Minott right now. Minott, setting the stage, was a second-round pick, 45th overall, so picked about 12 slots ahead of where Clark was picked 2 years later. This was a 2022 draft pick was Josh Minott. Because of his – I should have mentioned with Clark, he did sign that extension, so he's on a vet minimum contract. He's on the team next year and will be a restricted free agent the year after next. Josh Minott actually has a team option that needs to be decided upon by the end of June. The exact date, I believe, is the 30th. Actually, the 29th. June 29th is when the Timberwolves have to make an extension on the Josh Minott club option. He only is due a little over 2.1, almost 2.2 million next year if the club picks up his option. I mentioned this on yesterday's show. Garza also has a team option, which is a $2.3 million option, so slightly more, about $150,000 more than Minott's. There's always a chance they keep one and not the other. I think Minott at 2.1 million is kind of a no-brainer because I still think there is an NBA rotation player in there. And I actually wanted the Wolves to give him a little bit more leash this year. Now, I've always really liked Josh Minott. If you're a regular year listener to the show, if you're a multi-year listener to the show, a couple years ago, I did like a whole show on what I thought Minott's potential was. I thought he was a Brandon Clark-ish type player for Minnesota. Could be, athleticism off the charts, 6'8", 6'11" wingspan. The steal rate and block rates in college, minimal playing time, but all really good. Great instincts. I talked about how Jaylen Clark has a similar nose for the basketball as Josh Minott does on defense. The rebounding upside, the high motor, the athleticism is all really off the charts for Josh Minott. All stuff Minnesota's needed for a long time. However, when he's gotten his opportunity, he's made silly mistakes and hasn't really showcased the same high motor in the same way that Minnesota needs it. The upside and the flashes are still there. Like the block rate for Josh Minott is still crazy. It's 4.5% over, 93 NBA games over 3 seasons. The defensive numbers are all very impressive. The steal rate's 2.5%. Like, again, you compare that to some of the, of course, this is a very small sample, but compare it to league leaders, and those are really solid numbers. In NBA games, to this point, the consistency has not been there on either end of the floor. He's made kind of boneheaded decisions on offense. For a guy who's not going to have the ball in his hands much and certainly isn't being asked to create, he had a turnover rate of over 10% this year. And again, 46 games, only 276 minutes, a lot of garbage time, especially late in the season. But still, 10% is a far too high turnover rate for a guy who only should have the ball when he's catching lobs in transition or shooting a catch and shoot three. It needs to be better. The rebound rate was only 9% this year. And for his career, it's only 10.7%. That's something that in college, I was so encouraged by what that looked like for him at Memphis that I thought it was going to translate immediately. Again, only one season, 33 games with Memphis. But the rebound rate he had was over 14%, almost a 16% defensive rebound rate at Memphis. Okay, 14% overall, 16% defensively. And in the NBA so far, it's 9% and under 14% defensively. He has to rebound more and he can't turn the ball over. Those were kind of the bang your head against the wall moments that Chris Finch was like, all right, well, what's he giving us? If he's turning the ball over, he's not rebounding. He's a good defender. But then we saw like there was the one game where Minott played like 8 seconds, got backdoor cut. I don't remember who it was. It was a West Coast game, I think, but somebody just back cut him from the corner. Minott never turned his head, just got beat, taken out of the game, didn't go back in at any point in that game. And that was kind of the beginning of the end, if I recall correctly, for his presence in the rotation. He had a shot early on in the season, and Chris Finch was like, no, those mistakes can't keep happening if you're going to play rotation minutes on a team with championship aspirations. And was it the Portland game? Boston? I don't know. I was trying to find it real quick on the game log. I don't know. Anyway, Minott had his opportunities and blew them. I still think there's a rotation player in there for a lot of the reasons I just cited, the scouting report reasons coming out of college, and he's had some of those flashes. I want to talk a little bit more about that. And I know I talked about how Jaylen Clark could be the 9th guy, but why might Josh Minott get those opportunities over Jaylen Clark? We'll talk about all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time that you had an urgent need. Maybe you need a plumber, some other service provider, something around your house. If the first person that you called didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You most likely moved on, and that's exactly why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or your computer. OpenPhone lets you manage business calls and texts from a single app. The shared inbox feature is a game changer. Your team can jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. Plus, their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads, so you never miss a customer. OpenPhone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's OpenPhone, OpenPhone.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Okay, so all the stuff I listed about Josh Minott still holds true. I talked about the rebound rate in college. The other one that really got me in college was the steal and block rates. I mean, he had a steal rate of over 3%, a block rate of nearly 5.5%. And I'm not going to do the whole thing about like compare that to league leaders. I'm tempted to, but the short version is you take almost any given season in the NBA and you look at like the NBA leaders in steal rate and block rate. And what Josh Minott did in college, albeit 33 games, 1 season at Memphis, is right up there with league leaders in all these categories. Even as a non-center, like with the block shot rate. Now, obviously with Wemby and some of those guys, it's not, it's not close. But the Josh Minott block rate, I said I wasn't going to do it. I'm going to do it because it's fun. Even take this year. His block rate in college would have ranked 5th in the NBA among any position behind Wemby, Walker Kessler, Miles Turner, and Anthony Davis. It would have tied with Brook Lopez for 5th in the NBA if his college block rate was a block rate in this year's NBA. And in terms of number of games, Wemby ended up only playing 46 games, and he's still eligible here for this for the rate-based stats leaders on Basketball Reference. The steal rate is also really impressive. In college, 3.1%. That would have tied for 3rd in the NBA this season, behind Dyson Daniels. Chris Dunn would have been tied with Cason Wallace of OKC if his steal rate in college was applied to this year's NBA. And honestly, like I listed earlier what he did this year in the NBA in very limited minutes. He had a steal rate of 2.7%. He played in 46 games. It's the same number as Wemby. He just didn't play enough minutes. The 2.7% would have actually been 6th in the league, behind only those 3 guys I mentioned, Keon Ellis and Scottie Pippen Jr. And the block rate that he had this year for the Wolves, 4%, that would have been 15th in the league. And if you want to take his career block rate, 4.5%, 4.5% would have been the 12th best block rate in the entire NBA this season. That is Josh Minott's career block rate. So would he have block and steal rates that high if he played regularly? I don't know that he wouldn't. Honestly, the seventh best blocker in the NBA is Peyton Watson of Denver. Like, could he be a Peyton Watson-esque player? Peyton Watson's probably still a higher, I don't actually know that he's for sure a higher ceiling player. Right now, he's obviously a better player, and he probably has a higher floor because of the boneheaded stuff we've seen from Josh Minott, which I've already detailed. But the Josh Minott ceiling is still very high. The problem is the floor is lower than Jaylen Clark's floor. Like, we talked about Jaylen Clark already. The worst case for Jaylen Clark is he doesn't ever develop a consistent offensive game. He's already a lockdown defender that doesn't make the same kind of, again, boneheaded mistakes that Josh Minott's made. Jaylen Clark still hasn't rebounded his position as well, but like, he plays guard. That's going to be less of a thing that sticks out. But for his position, he's a good rebounder. He's a great defender. He doesn't make the silly mistakes. And I think the offensive upside is lower for Jaylen Clark. He shot 43% from three. And I agree, it's hard to get into a rhythm if you're Josh Minott. We saw him shoot really well in preseason, and then as soon as the regular season started, he couldn't knock down a three. It's the whole, you got to shoot well to keep your job, but if you don't shoot well, you don't have a chance to shoot well and get a job, right? Like, it's a bit of a chicken or the egg type, I guess. Catch-22 makes more sense. A bit of a catch-22 situation, right? You need the chance to make the shots. If you don't get the chances to make the shots, you can't make the shots. But it's also a performance league. And Jaylen Clark knocked down threes when he had the chance, and Josh Minott hasn't. I am still a Josh Minott believer. If he ends up somewhere else this year and gets an opportunity, I think he will be a functional rotation player. I'm not saying he's going to be an all-star. Is the upside still there? Yeah, probably. For Josh Minott to be an all-star, it's pretty unlikely. But could he be a rotation player on a good team? I think absolutely. And hopefully some of that maturity and growth is happening, and we're going to get there this season. I do think he's got a shot at beating Jaylen Clark out for those minutes simply because he's a much bigger player and can play the stretch four. Like, say they end up trading Julius Randle. I mean, Josh Minott's going to have an opportunity to, a pretty good opportunity to earn a rotation role. There's also a pretty decent chance he's added it if they make a trade if the Wolves pick up his option, which I expect them to, at less than $2.2 million. If he gets lumped into a trade, there's not a whole lot of value there from a salary standpoint if you're matching salaries. But if they're able to aggregate salaries and players and they need a roster spot, there is a team that's going to say Josh Minott could be our 10th man. A good team. Or it might be a rebuilding team, a Spursy type team that's like, I think we got a shot at the playoffs. Let's give him 8th man, 7th man minutes and see what happens. And it could go either way. But right now, if he was given the opportunity, is he going to drag down an offense a little bit? Maybe. But I mean, so is Jaden McDaniels for most of his career. And I'm not saying he'll be as good as Jaden McDaniels. I'm saying there's a chance. Because he's so good defensively, he's such a good shot blocker. It's the extra stuff. Can he figure it out enough to stay on the floor for 20, 25 minutes a game instead of getting pulled after 8 seconds because he gets backdoor cut on the first defensive opportunity he has? I'm still a Josh Minott believer. I do think if there's a battle for 9th man minutes, it's probably, or at least for that role, because again, we'll talk about TJ Shannon and Rob Dillingham tomorrow. Those guys make more sense because as first round picks, what they've both flashed this year and the type of, the Wolves need offense, those guys are both better offensive players than Jaylen Clark and Josh Minott by far. If one of those two guys gets the 9th spot, TJ Shannon and Rob Dillingham, and one of Jaylen Clark or Josh Minott gets the 10th spot, I mean, that's a pretty interesting kind of way to look at this, and I think it makes sense. So we'll definitely be tracking that. Again, tomorrow we'll talk Dillingham. We'll talk TJ Shannon Jr., both of last year's first-round picks. We'll break down their seasons and what to expect from them, potential roles with the Timberwolves here come fall. All right, that's all I got for you today. We'll continue the player review series, as I said, tomorrow, but then also the rest of the week. We'll keep an eye on the finals that kick off Thursday night. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder, you can make your second listen the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. I made my pick for our mock draft at number 17. I'm not going to reveal it now. Keep an eye out for the mock draft. I did a video on who I will select. It's certainly a player that I genuinely like, and I like the Wolves taking at 17. So more on him as we get closer to the draft as well. A reminder, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.